With just days to go to the federal election, we've assembled the crew to see how the polling is going. The polling has changed dramatically in the last few days. So joining us today, we've got Ryan Smith, the Shadow Minister for Planning in Victoria. We've got Mario Beeks, security consultant, ex-Croatian military officer, and the author of the amazing book, Blood and Soil. We've got Ian Cook, the director of ICook Foods and of the infamy of the Sluggate saga. And we've also got Caroline Council, one of Australia's leading family law experts. Welcome, team.
Welcome. Thank you.
Good day, Michael.
Now, we're a few days out. Suddenly the polling is getting closer and closer. One of the interesting things is we're still seeing, just as we record this, 3 days out, we're still seeing over 25% undecided. What's going to tip them around, do you think, Ryan?
Well, it is quite amazing how the polls are turning, and I guess it's something that the Morrison team has been saying all along, that when it comes to the crunch, people will stick with a government that's more stable, particularly in these trying times. I think what's happened over the last 2 weeks, and particularly when we see the gaffes from Albanese, and even up to yesterday, I should say, where he literally ran away from questioning about, again, his own policies and his own policy costings. So it was a pretty unedifying vision of having him turn his back and go away for some pretty basic questions. It's those sort of actions, I think, that are going to sway voters when they see someone who patently is just not up to the job. And, gotcha questions are one thing, but asking a potential prime minister to explain his own policies and how much they cost is not a gotcha question. It's just asking for a bit of clarity for the people who are going to vote for him.
And it's played right into the narrative that the Morrison government has set right from the start. They've walked them straight into the trap where he can't be trusted. He's not across his policies. You don't know what you're going to get. And I understand that it is normal procedure to release your costings as close to the election as possible. And given 2019, the shock and horror when Billy Shorten announced them a week out, and we saw the outcomes of that, you can almost understand it, but it doesn't play well. It's just...
It's certainly it's certainly a practice that's been done in the past. I think the shining thing for everyone is the way he's handling it. I mean, if you want to do it that way, just handle it better. He's just has shown an inability to be able to handle questions, issues, and there's going to be a lot more difficult, complicated and controversial issues that he's going to have to deal with if he's Prime Minister.
I agree with you. At the end of the day, if you're going to release that sort of information close to the election, you need to be all over it so that you can be questioned about it, you can give answers that explain your position, etc. When you can't explain it, run away from it, and you drop it just before the election, Australians are smarter than that. They see the cynicism and all of that. And that may be what you're seeing in the polls now.
There's two reasons, though, would pick up on that. It's either you can't explain it, or you don't want to explain it because it may be unpalatable, or it may leave points of attack open to the opposition. Either way, it's not a good look.
No, exactly. And
if I may add something, yeah.
Go on, Murray.
Yes, yeah, please. Yeah, I'm just, as you know, I'm overseas and I'm watching this very closely. It's all across the cable TV elections in Australia. And yesterday there was a highlight. Opposition leader Albanese was run away from the room, and the questions you can see across the network, across the world, why the elections in Australia, an opposition leader runs away from being asked questions. And me as Australian, I think myself, that's very interesting, because first the COVID, avoiding this all away the election, asking the question. Now it's clearly that they have no plan. I can see that Labor has no plan, and maybe we're going to find out few days before the election, which actually is now. So if we don't know now, we're never going to know. But public across the globe sees the opposition leader escaping and runs away from the being asked hard questions.
I agree. The other thing too is their whole election slogan was for a better future. And so far, I haven't had Albanese or even the local member for us who's literally, we haven't had any mailbox drops, nothing. No one is saying to me why my future is going to be better, how they're going to plan my future better, what they're going to do so that maybe my kids or grandkids have a better future. It's just a slogan. And, you know, a slogan may have worked for Gough Whitlam, but because Conservatives have been in for so long, but it's not going to work now. The electorate is a lot savvier than that.
Caroline, the space...
Absolutely. I was just going to say it's smoke and mirrors. The time to have come out with the proper costings. You know, we've seen this play out before, and we've seen it play out badly for government in opposition. What amazes me is that they have not learned from the mistakes of the past. I'm sitting here totally gobsmacked, and I just think it's been, you know, one gaffe after another, and that was truly spectacular yesterday.
Now, we've also seen some interesting polls in the individual, because even though it's a federal election, all elections are local, all of them. So it doesn't matter whether Labor win 100% of one seat or Liberal win 100% of another, it's winning the seats in the right places that go. Now, we've seen Christine Keneally's, the polling, narrow so far down, and that was a safe Labor seat, I think with about a 14% margin, come down to a neck and neck contest with, I think she was a Deputy Mayor, Daly, who local, western suburbs, Christine Keneally, northern suburbs, parachuted in, rents a small apartment in the area. Electorate. This is just everything that's wrong with politics, and shows a little bit of the hubris and arrogance. Would you agree?
They're exactly the right words, Michael. I mean, as Labor's doing in the state, they're putting the brother of a trades hall official from Frankston in a seat across the bay in Altona for our November election. I mean, that is just the height of hubris and arrogance, to say we're going to take your vote so much for granted that it really doesn't matter anymore who we put up for you. It's not going to be a local champion. It's not going to be a local advocate. It's not going to be someone who's going to be travelling on the streets or sending their kids to the local schools. It is just the height of arrogance to say, we know no matter who we put up, no matter where they're from, we expect you to vote for them. And that's what Christine Keneally's seeing now. And I'm heartened to see that the local residents in Sydney are punishing Labor for that move. And I hope they do so again in Altona and Point Cook come November.
Caroline, the other one that happened this week that I thought was, it really comes down to ideology. Suddenly it became like an Oprah show, and you get a house and you get a house and everyone gets a house. And then we have, who would have guessed, the Housing Industry Association coming out and going, no, that's a great idea. We had the superannuation funds coming out and going, no, that's a terrible idea.
Terrible idea. I thought one of the most compelling discussions around that was the analysis by which property prices in the key areas are going to be driven up, and by how much they're going to be driven up. So, for example, in Sydney, a 50,000 access to your superannuation will potentially drive prices up by $57,000. So it doesn't matter how much you're able to access your super. And I love the fact that the whole concept of superannuation has been, we as a country need to take responsibility about ourselves in retirement, and we should no longer be dependent upon the taxpayer in the future, but we really have to guard that carefully. Well, that's been thrown to the wind. Interestingly, of course, the opposition is saying, well, you've been in power for so long. Why does it take a week out from a federal election to come up with this brilliant idea, knowing that there has been a housing problem for as long as there has been? You've literally just thrown this into the mix to garner support. Of course, we've got to be very careful about any sort of policies that governments come up with on the fly in order to get votes. It's got to be carefully considered. And hey ho, guess what? I mean, that sort of change to superannuation has to pass through government anyway. It's got to be voted on. and I think it's true of both sides of politics, they make promises without necessarily knowing whether that's going to be passed by the newly formed government, regardless of which side of politics gets in. I'm still saying Scott Morrison's government will get in. I've said that all along.
I love your
Wow.
optimism.
Yeah, you may be quite right, Karen. I think I was talking to some people who supposedly were reasonably in the know, and the consensus amongst them was that Morrison will get in, but probably need a couple of independents to help him.
Independence, yes.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot of independence happening now, and I think it's going to be a key battleground for every seat to have the actually independent included in your government.
So it's going to be interesting. What does Liberal blue look like with a touch of teal? We're talking about a new colour here. Yeah, I think he's going to have to do the dance, and I think he's going to have to change some things, which he's flagging, obviously, by saying I'm a bulldozer, and I know I behave like a bulldozer. I think he's going to have to bite the bullet on a federal ICAC. And I think the days of pork barrelling electorates, we're not going to put up with that as an electorate. It's pretty obvious what's going down in the various electorates. So again, Michael, that goes back to your comment, which I think is incredibly astute, that federally, yes, we're talking about going to an election, but it is decided on local issues with local politicians, putting forward what their proposals are for given electorates. So I just think, and picking up what Ryan has said, the electorates we're not as dumbed down as we once upon a time could have been by virtue of the monopoly of information through the press. We now eat information from a variety of sources, and with that broader diet comes a broader understanding of what's happening at the political level.
Yeah. Now, one of the other interesting ones, we've seen one of the divisive ones, Deeves narrow in on the polling as well. So, these are all very interesting, and like we say, local and important seats. Where should we look on election night, do you think, for the watershed moments? What hints should we get for the outcome, do you think?
Well, I think on that particular seat, as much as Twitter and the opposition want us to focus on those issues that have been canvassed in that area, I think Carolyn's right. It goes back to, is she going to be a good local member? Is she going to be a good representative? She's, I don't know her, and I haven't delved particularly deeply into her, but she seems competent. She seems reasonably popular. So it is those local issues and local representation that are going to get you across the line. As far as seats locally, I mean, I've heard recently that some people are even looking at Deakin here in the eastern suburbs as getting a swing towards him. Chisholm doesn't seem as a danger as it was before. There seems to be some talk that that's going to remain in Liberal hands. It'll be those sort of seats with these, if you see a movement to or from those, they'll be the bellwether seats. Obviously, Corangamite you'll need to look at, Dunkley as well. A key one, of course, of the Teal's popularity is going to be Goldstein with Tim Wilson, who does seem under pressure at the moment. But the general consensus, as I read in Jeff Kennett's column today in the Herald Sun, yes, there's a lot of houses with Dr. Monique Ryan's sign up, but there's a hell of a lot of houses that don't have a sign up at all. And his view is, living in the area that he does, that is the silent majority who will stick with a proven member who is popular locally in his electorate, who holds arguably the second most powerful position in the country, and is probably, it can be reasonably said, discharged his responsibilities pretty admirably over the last couple of years. That silent majority will keep Josh from losing his local election. But I think, yeah, if you look at Dunkley, Goldstein, Chisholm and Corangamite in Victoria, they're probably the major ones, and I'm not sufficiently across the other states to have a good idea, except for maybe Nicole Flint's seat in South Australia, Christopher Pine's old seat.
Now, Ian, I'm going to put this one to you because you have a a particularly interest in Victorian politics apart from Ryan. I'm not sure if it's happening in other electorates or in other states because I'm not seeing it, but I've noticed now there's a lot of campaigning or ads coming from federal Labor about the lack of support that Victoria's received from the federal government. It almost seems like they're worried that the state of Victoria and Andrew's administration may have pulled them backwards a bit and may cause them problems, and they're looking to somehow find an excuse for what Andrews had to do because of the lack of funding. Would that be a possibility, do you think?
I don't know. I mean, a couple of small business people that I know and know very closely in Victoria, they don't see the federal government as being the problem in terms of what happened to them. And they certainly, while no one's ever going to say no to a handout or to be helped, they see that the issues they've got, one in particular, you know, he had a bar in Richmond. He was on the verge of selling it when COVID broke out. He owned it. He borrowed to get it, built it up, did that, got it working, got to a point where he was starting a young family, got it on the market. He's now $240,000 in debt, can't sell it, and doesn't know, and does, you know, the old customer base hasn't come back fully yet. So people like him certainly have such a, I guess hatred's the best word for what Andrews has done to Victoria, that no, I mean, what you were just discussing, I think that's the way bureaucrats probably want to see it or portray it if they're supporting Andrews. But the reality is I don't think that's the case.
Now, the independents are going to be a fascinating thing, and one that we haven't seen before. I don't think I've ever seen the electorate so aware of their preferences before. It used to, just be a vote for your party and nothing else mattered. Now, with the rise of the independents, I think the Greens are polling at about 14% of the primary at the moment. But should people vote for some of the smaller parties, the Palmers, the United Australia Party, the Greens? There's a lot of talk about preferencing the majors last. So is a vote for, whether it's Liberal or Labor in 7th or 8th, or depending where you vote above or below, is it a matter of, gee, we really could have such a mix? And if so, a lot of the Teals are saying they will support either side. Can we believe them?
They're only running in Liberal seats, so. Sorry, Ian, I cut you off.
No, all I was going to say is that it's a very interesting question, this question of how people will vote. Will they vote according to the how to vote card they're given to follow a particular independent and what they think, or will they follow a party line and just tick above the line? Now, my wife and I aren't going to be in our electorate on voting day, so we voted early. Now, the Senate ticket is huge. Unless you really know your stuff, numbering 12 below the line as a minimum is really going to be a challenge for a lot of people. So I think they'll take the card and just do that. The thing I found very interesting when I stood back, and I was there only for a short, when I say short period of time, maybe 20, 25 minutes, I was watching people as they came up. Now you had the Labor Party were there, the Greens were there, Hanson's group were there, the UAP were there, and there were a couple of other independents. I think we've got about 6 lower house candidates in our area. What amazed me were the number of people that took UAP how to vote cards and said no to all the others. Like they were saying, no, I'm only going to use this one. So even that's a tiny sample, it just surprised me. I'm used to, and I used to work at a polling, on polling day years ago, and you would see people, most people would come and get everybody's how to vote card so they didn't show any preferences, but that wasn't happening. And I thought that was very interesting.
If I may, you would expect me to say don't vote for the independents, but I'll tell you why. The 2 major parties, Liberal and Labor, and to a lesser extent the Greens and the Nationals, have a long-term tenure, I guess, and the people who are in those parties, and I'm talking about the parliamentary team, have genuinely generally worked together for some time. They've taken considered positions on every piece of legislation that's gone through, usually with the lens of, if not political, then of the lens of their values. A new party, a minor party like the UAP or the Victoria Party, is a group of disparate people who have never worked together, who might have some common views on policy direction, but I haven't seen any example where they have demonstrated common views on values, deep values. And I think that having parties come in on single issues or smaller group of issues, once they get into Parliament, if they do get into Parliament, they'll find that the large majority of legislation and debate is not around those issues. So when I speak to people who speak to me about the Lib Dems or the UAP or whoever, I ask, well, what is their infrastructure program for the next 10 years? What's their views on education and curriculum? And what are their views on local policing? Or what are their views on restoring the environment? All these many, many different things that single issue or small issue parties don't have a view on, but they're going to have to vote on many, many times. And if you don't have that core set of values amongst everyone in your party who you know, who you've worked with, then it's very, very difficult to make informed decisions. And what minor parties come to be in many cases, without being dismissive of those who particularly, I guess, support in general terms directions that my party takes. But I find that minor parties become very transactional because they don't have values to guide them. They want to get results on these single issues, so they're prepared to give up on at certain times on other issues. And the pandemic bill that we recently saw go through Parliament is a significant example of that, where we saw the Transport Matters Party, who is essentially there to support commercial vehicle drivers, voting on something that affected 6.5 million Victorians, and had said previously that he wouldn't support it, but became very transactional in his support of it and ended up voting for it. So that's why I say to people, vote for a major party, even, may I say, my opponents in Labor, rather than a minor party, because you don't know what you're going to get on so many different issues with a minor party.
If I can add something. Sorry, Caroline. I cut you.
Mario,
Sorry.
you go.
Okay, I just want to say, Ryan, thank you for sharing this insight. And I truly believe that people will listen this show, because this is very important. Even I was undecisive who to vote for, even I'm a Liberal Party member. But the point we're trying to make is, this is the best explanation I ever heard, because people want to vote for independents, just not to vote for the, previous parties, they have accustomed to vote. So thank you, Ryan, for giving that insight. And I'm truly hoping that people want to listen to this. Sorry, Caroline. Sorry for that one.
No, I was just going to say, again, thank you, Ryan, because if anything, the voting populace of Australia gets frustrated about how short-sighted, for example, some governmental policies are. Well, once you throw the independents into the mix, and once government has to dance attendant upon them, the energy and time that it takes for government to work with the independents to try and broker deals, to try and get legislative reform through, because that's government's core business, obviously, is legislating for change. Again, instead of that long-term view about where are we heading, and Ryan, what I really appreciate about you being in opposition is that long-term view that you're taking, whereas vote for the independents and you lose that long-term perspective. You are focused on the minutiae of the local interest rather than what is good for the populace of Victoria, in the case of the Victorian government, what is good for the entirety of Australia at this federal election. What's disappointing is that it seems to be a vote against the major parties rather than a vote for who is going to best achieve those longer term outcomes for Australia. I've often said, almost facetiously, give me a benign autocracy and we can get a lot more done as a country. Long-term governments, provided they don't get fat and lazy, and provided they don't suffer from arrogance and hubris, you can often see them achieving more because of that longer term that they're in power, where they're able to get that momentum. So I just don't think it's a good or healthy outcome for Australia for people to be voting teal, because all it's going to do is slow down and bog down the business of government, regardless of which side gets in.
Yeah, that transactional nature that Ryan rightly mentioned, that's exactly what happens. And values can't ever be transactional. They can't be dependent on something else. Now, the polling shows that both of the majors, and the Libs are a coalition, but it shows that both of the majors are down around the low 30%. So neither of them at the moment, if we go on the polling or even the bookies, can form, no government has ever been formed with that low of primary vote. So, you know, these,
I think,
yep. So go on, Ian.
No, I think that, so before when I was talking about what I'd seen and the independents, and I get that they become transactional. If we have the situation we have a situation that has arisen because of politics, social media, or, you know, every life, if you like, and the way we get information has changed. What I would refer to as my political enemies, those are from the left, which includes the Greens, they've polarised their side of politics beyond rationality. If Morrison does get the majority and has to work with independents, I think, while I agree with everything that's been said about them transactionally, is get in, bring them in, and bring them under your wing. It's like, you know, the new kid at school. If you're running the biggest group, get the new kid, bring him in, bring him under your wing, and give him some of that support, and then you may not have quite the problems that have been enunciated. It's okay to say this is the problem, and I agree, but the electorate aren't going to change. They're not going to change this election. So if what they're saying happens, then get in there quick, get the ones that you think you can work with as quickly as you can, and help them around the schoolyard.
Mm-hmm. Great point.
I totally agree. I'm totally agree with that.
Yeah. And let's not forget to, one of the sure signs that I'm seeing of an echo chamber of people being stuck in their little bubbles is the fact that they think that the governments are setting these agendas. Let's be clear, the government don't set agendas, they actually follow. There's polling going on day by day. They're going to the electorate and saying, is this important? Is that important? Does this matter? Does that not matter? And then they're coming out to follow. Whereas we think they lead, they're actually following. So we need to realise that, gee, if one government's campaigning on one issue and the other one has taken a different direction, there's pretty much enough of a division to support both positions, and we need to stop putting it back on government.
I would argue that Howard with the GST and Abbott with Stop the Boats certainly set the agenda, and they were successful as a result. I mean, maybe the problem, and you're completely right, Ian, people are going to the independents despite what I say about the ineffectiveness of it, but they are, which means that, to my mind, neither of the major party leaders has been articulate enough to actually put forward a very strong position to set an agenda, which is what I want to see from my leaders. I want to see them lead, tell me where they want to go, and leave it to me and articulate why, and leave it to me to decide whether that's the way I want to go. But you're right, at the moment, there just does seem to be, well, what do you want to do kind of attitude.
Yeah, that's the, you try to please everyone and you end up pleasing no one.
Exactly. Now, we're going to wind up. We've got to wind up. So I'm going to ask each of you two questions. Number one, who do you think is the outcome? And number two, what do you think the big surprise will be apart from the outcome, Ryan?
I would have said a different answer 2 weeks ago, but I think that Albanese's ineptitude has opened the door for Morrison. He may need the likes of Katter and maybe as a UAP MP here or there if they manage to get up to help him get along. But I think that it looks like he might pull the rabbit out of the hat here. The surprise of the night will be, as far as Victoria is concerned, that hopefully Josh Frydenberg and to a lesser extent Tim Wilson hold their seats, as well as that Chisholm that I spoke about earlier.
Great. What about you, Caroline?
I think I've made my views well known. I think I'm just sorry I didn't put a bet on it. I think Scott Morrison, the Liberals, are going to get back in. Well, maybe it's not a surprise. I think it's going to be a hung parliament. I think it's really going to be a race to court, as Ian said, court the kids in the schoolyard as quickly as possible in order to get into power properly, to be a viable government that can lead. So it'll be that combination of teal and liberal blue, and the surprise is going to be, what's that colour going to be called?
Great. Ian?
Okay, well, I agree with Carolyn. I think that Scott Morrison looks like the better of the lesser of two evils to most of the people in the marketplace, in the electorate at the moment. And the surprise, I think the surprise might be that he gets back in his own, with maybe one, maybe 2 seat majority.
Great. Mario, and close with you.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I agree with Caroline and Ian that Scott Morrison will have the party. It's going to win. Of course, it's going to enter the parliament with some independence, whatever it is. But surprise of the night, I will call something else. And I truly believe that Albanese, after this election night, he will be replaced as a opposition leader. I truly believe he's going to be removed as a leader of opposition. That's what I believe is going to happen.
All right. And I'm going to close with, I don't think it matters that much. And as my wise old father used to say, regardless of who wins, I'm still going to have to go to work on Monday. So we'll leave it there, team, and we'll meet on the other side and we'll discuss the outcome. Thanks again for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob.
Care.